Speaking of basketball, I heard you're a certified hooper in the VC world.
Who told you that?
A little friend of ours, what was it, Tuesday, Wednesday?
Yes,
Wednesday.
I think.
A guy I used to hoop with, apparently. Rob Biederman.
Oh, yeah. I know Rob Biederman. Yeah.
We were interviewing him the other day.
From like Asymmetric Rob?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. So we were talking about who we're going to be filming with in Boston. We're like, oh, yeah, Steve at Bessemer. He's like, no way. Dude, me and Steve would hoop together. I was like, really?
We definitely hooped.
He's like, yeah, he's a killer on the court.
Certified hooper.
I don't know about that. I've got a somewhat decent shot. They used to call me...
White boy can jump.
No, literally. In high school, they used to call me Credit Card Kraus because like you could only slip a credit card under my hops. So
Credit card Kraus.
Yeah.
That's bullying.
Yeah, but it's okay. You know, I try to box people out and get the 1 inch vertical up there and grab the board. I love basketball. It's really fun. I love watching basketball. I love coaching basketball. I coach my sons. I love playing.
Oh, nice.
So
do you support the Celtics?
Great. Huge Celtics fan.
Yeah. I love the Celtics.
Not really, but they're fine.
Yeah, they're great.
I'm a Warriors fan.
Oh, I went to the game on Tuesday.
Yeah, did Warriors won with Buddy Hield,
Buddy Hield
dagger?
went off, and Steph is just so good.
Yeah.
He's really good. I'd never seen Steph live.
That's pretty exciting.
He's pretty cool. My son actually got Steph's autograph.
Oh, that's so sick.
We basically have seats where my boys love the Celtics, so we go to a bunch of games. So we basically have seats at like right by the opposing team's tunnel.
Okay.
So, we've gotten, actually, I used to not be a huge, I always thought Luka's an amazing player like Doncic, but I was like, always like, he comes across as a little bit of a jerk. Yeah. He was amazing. He, like, you can tell some people are surprised, like, he signed 50 kids' autographs, including my son got Luka. Wow. He's gotten a bunch of other players, but he really wanted Steph, and it was amazing. Like, we got there 2 hours before because he really wanted this. So we were able to, our seats are kind of close, so we basically moved up a little bit, and we're right there where the players come out. So we got, like, what did he get? He got Gary Payton Jr.'s autograph. Nice. He got Luke Cornett came by because both teams go in and out of the same tunnel. But Steph came by. First he runs out and does his warm-up, totally fine. Then he came by, and to his credit, he signed a ton of autographs.
No way.
But it was wild, dude. I felt like I was like in a mosh pit at a ZZ Top concert. Like my son he's 9, but he's decently strong, and I'm like, obviously 48, but not very strong. And like we were just getting pushed against the barrier because like everyone was like, Steph.
Wow.
It was great. My son was like, thank God I got that autograph because I was like working hard to push these grown men.
Was it on paper or a jersey?
No, he had a jersey, he had a Steph jersey. So he actually signed in the 30, which was super cool.
Wow.
So that was the haul. We were very happy.
I'm very jealous. Yeah, that's like my favorite player. So
he's amazing. Wow. He's really talented.
Do you hang out with a lot of other VCs outside of just basketball? Is that like a VC culture? You hang out with people outside of work, or you kind of just hang with your family?
I try to hang with my family a lot nowadays. I used to do a lot of the VC, networking stuff. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's the best use of a VC's time.
Yeah.
Because like the whole goal of being a VC is to, I think the best investments that VCs make are non-consensus early investments. And if you hang out with other VCs, it tends to be consensus thinking, just like often in life, right? Groupthink. And my favorite time to spend with VCs is actually around the board table, right? Or actually working on a company. And then I really do like to hang out with them because I was just talking to an entrepreneur this morning. I said, I just find value of listening to other people's thoughts, because it might reinforce what I was thinking or change the way I was thinking. And I just think that kind of think around a specific topic is helpful, but around like networking with other VCs, I'm not sure like you get a lot of non-consensus views.
Mm-hmm. Steve, you invest in healthcare startups. The election just happened. I don't even know what day we are, but we're a couple days
after
the election here in 2024. Help our audience understand what are the implications of a Trump presidency for healthcare.
Yeah. Well, I think it remains very much up in air. I would say a lot will depend on who he appoints. The policy is set by people, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot will depend on who he appoints in key administration positions, starting with HHS, FDA, and then there's CMS, which is the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, right? And so that big appointment of Health and Human Services leader and then the sub-appointments of who will run those various agencies is going to be very important. I think there's glass half full, glass half empty, mm-hmm. right? The healthcare has been a place where Trump and his team and the Republicans have spent a lot of time over the last decade, right? The current most formative piece of legislation is Obamacare, as people labeled it, but it's also known as the Affordable Care Act, right? There's really two huge pieces of that. One is the creation of these exchanges, right, where people who are underserved in terms of their healthcare benefits, don't have health insurance, or have less health insurance, are able to go to these marketplaces, which are, there's both federal marketplace called healthcare.gov, and then there's states that run their own marketplaces. And that has been historically a place where Trump and Republicans have wanted to dismantle that for whatever reason. Maybe it's because they believe it's another government entitlement program that they don't want to have, or maybe it's because they don't like the fact that Obama and his team crafted it, right? It's been a place where they've consistently tried to attack that law, both legislatively and then, of course, as we know, through the legal system with the Supreme Court. And pretty much every single time they've been shot down, right? Whether it be the court has said, no, we're going to keep it the law of the land, or whether legislatively they just haven't been able to have enough votes to get it overturned. And then politically, what was once, viewed as Obamacare viewed as a very negative piece of policy and legislation, like it had very low approval ratings when it first came out, actually has now turned into something that's wildly popular, and has grown in terms of the number of people that access healthcare through the exchanges. And as a result, every time that the Republicans have tried to attack it, they've actually lost seats in elections. And so the question is, do they have, I think on a policy level, they very much would like to dismantle it. For whatever reason, they would like to do that. The question is, do they have the political will, right? And I actually think they don't. I think they'll try to reform it using sort of like executive ways to do that, like nip at pieces that they don't like and try and make it less large in terms of government entitlement. But I don't think they're going to try to truly overturn it.
Why do you think the Affordable Care Act had such a transition of being sort of hated to now it's very appreciated and accepted?
Well, I'd say there's substantively and then there's sort of like politically, right? I'd say substantively, health insurance is not having health insurance. Healthcare debt, healthcare expenses are the number one reason people go bankrupt in our country. Like, it's a real pocketbook issue, right? You can say whether it's a right or not, whether people should have healthcare, but I think people feel it. I mean, one thing this election told us, right, is that people vote with their wallet. This was an election that proved there were lots of different dynamics, but I think at the end of the day, the thing that Democrats missed was like, it's all about the economy, stupid, which is what James Carville said when Bill Clinton ran. Like, that's what this was about, right? People really felt inflation. They felt the grocery prices. They felt, they felt in their pocketbook. And I think healthcare is actually, even more than groceries, is the number one reason people feel pain economically. And so, and honestly, healthcare.gov was created to serve people who don't have health insurance. Who are those people? Those tend to be people who are, either unemployed or actually are employed, but their employer doesn't provide insurance, or it's insurance that is insufficient to meet their needs. These tend to be working class and impoverished people. And we saw in this election, right, the demographics are changing. A lot of those people actually are voting Republican now because the Republican Party spoke to their needs, right? Yeah. So actually, I think the demographics of who healthcare.gov is serving actually is now a lot more Republican base of voters. So it's a really interesting shifting dynamic. So I think both from a substantive perspective, i.e. people care about having insurance, right, and need it, and they feel it, as well as a political sort of change is why it's here to stay. And finally, I'd say we've seen this time and time in both other forms of policy and government bills. Like, once something becomes like people get it, it almost does become an entitlement. Like, they feel like they're entitled to it. And it's really hard to rip it away politically. So I think there's a bunch of reasons, but those would be the primary ones, I'd say. I
feel like this election, there were so many things that were important to voters, like democracy, the economy, abortion, immigration, and healthcare really wasn't up there, right? And I feel like in past elections, it was one of the most important things people voted on. Why do you think that's the case for the 2024 election?
I think you're right. It was, interestingly, other than a woman's right to choose, which is a healthcare issue, obviously, but like you didn't hear anything really about the ACA. In fact, you heard people, like we talked about previously, like people who were using it as a political wedge to try and say, hey, we want to repeal it. They weren't even touched. Like the Republicans were like, no, it's here to stay. Even Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, in the last weeks made a gaffe of saying maybe we will take on, the truth is maybe we will take on Obamacare and the ACA once we're elected, and he had to pull that back because so because of the reasons we talked about. I think it's the main place where they focused, they just realized it wasn't worth taking on, which is just so interesting of evolution. To your point, over the last decade, every single election, it felt like healthcare was, if not the top topic, one of them. And this one, to your point, it was way down on the list. Because there were other more important issues I think people felt that we talked about, immigration, obviously the sort of economy itself and the impact it was having on working class people. And then I do think abortion was an issue.
Sure.
I mean, obviously on the state level, every time they've run, ballot initiatives to kind of get rid of the restrictions on abortion, for the most part they've won. It would save for a couple few states. Those have been very, that's been a healthcare issue that has resonated with people, and frankly, where restrictions have been overturned by ballot initiatives, except for Florida. But even then, they needed a 60% vote in Florida to overturn the restrictive law, and they got 57%. 57%. Wow. So, in a state where Trump won 12 points. So to the point of like abortion, I think the populace has spoke that they don't want. Dobbs was an issue for them.
We often hear that in America, healthcare is broken. Can you help us understand? We don't work in healthcare at all, and so can you help us understand why people say that, and if you can speak to if you agree with that, or if maybe that's an overstated point?
I would say there would be three elements that I think how people experience healthcare, and I'll point to each one to your question of whether it's broken or not. One is quality. The second is cost, and the third is the actual experience of the patients or the consumers who try and go and procure healthcare, right? On the first, quality, I actually don't think it's broken. I think of course there are places that we can improve, and if you live in lower income zip codes, you have a worse quality outcomes than people who have means, and so we constantly have to push on that, But overall, if you compare America to other industrialized nations and the outcomes that we get, they are by far the best. And frankly, the innovations that this country creates are amazing. Like, look to the fact that, GLP-1s, these drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy, now actually can really ameliorate obesity if you take them. I mean, it's just incredible, right? In terms of the impact that can have in human health, because obesity has so many other comorbidities. And now you see these drugs like lowering your risk for heart failure, like improving kidney disease. Actually, I just read a study where it might lessen or lower your likelihood to have Alzheimer's.
Wow.
Yeah, so outcomes in our country are awesome. It is not broken. It is actually an amazing system. Now, the other two, cost, it is broken. Healthcare is like the gift that keeps on giving to, businesses in some ways, right? Because it grows GDP plus 4%. On a good year. Sometimes it grows GDP plus 7%, right? And it is, 20% and growing of our economy. It is the single line item in every single state's budget and balance sheet that will bankrupt every single state because they pay for most of Medicaid. So it's the largest unfunded liability, right? It is the reason, as we talked about, that a lot of people go bankrupt. I mean, you could go on and on and on. And in terms of cost, our performance is way worse than a lot of other industrialized countries. So that sort of equation of quality versus cost, we got to work on the cost, because it's unaffordable and it's existential in terms of what it will do to the American economy. So I'd say it's broken there. And then the patient experience, it has gotten better since when I first started investing in healthcare, for sure, but it is so far removed from any other experience you have in the modern economy, right? And I always say to my partners at Bessemer, like, healthcare is like 10 or 20 years behind every other industry that we invest in. like you could hail a taxi via Uber, right, or a black car via Uber way before you could actually like book an online appointment in healthcare, like years before, right? And even when you book an online appointment in healthcare, it's still like not a great experience.
Is that because of the regulatory guardrails with healthcare?
Well, honestly, one of the things, harkening back to the formative piece of legislation that we talked about and how important government is to healthcare, only in 2008, actually coming out of the last economic downturn, when the Great Recession, when all the banks almost went under, one of the things that was in the Recovery Act, the Stimulus Act, to reboost the economy at that time, was this piece of legislation called the High Tech Act, which basically was $40 billion. It's actually a large amount, but not that large amount in our economy, that the government used to incent doctors and health systems to actually move your medical records from being on pen and paper. You guys might be too young to remember this, but literally when I used to walk in my doctor's office, there'd be stacks of filing folders and cabinets with, Steve Kraus, Kraus, and all my records would be in there. That all got digitized, but that only happened because the federal government said, hey, we're going to pay you doctors to do this, because we know we have to do this in order to get the data into zeros and ones like every other piece of the economy. And once you get the data into zeros and ones, you can actually start to do stuff with the data. So that was like 15 years ago that happened, to give you a sense. Like, think about when Salesforce and Oracle and all those companies were created, like decades before, to my point earlier, than when we actually had true digital data in healthcare.
I guess they really are 10, 20 years behind.
10 or 20 years behind,
industry,
always.
Yeah.
And so only when you have that can you start to do stuff with that data, right? Can you start to think about, okay, how do we stratify the population? How do we reach out to the people who are sick in a digital way? Then you start to see telehealth, right? Because only once you start to have the data can you really actually have, virtual care, right? Otherwise, everything has to be done in person. So I think you have to set that, give that context to understand where we are. But we made lots of strides. By the way, virtual care was like non-existent pre-pandemic. We had made a number of investments early on before that, thinking that it was going to happen. But the pandemic, because no one could go see their doctor in person, I say advanced our industry in terms of the sort of digital and virtual delivery, like 2 decades in the matter of, a year, right? So that was unfortunately, that was a horrific, episode in American history. But from the healthcare perspective, it actually forced, again, a reason to force doctors and health systems to actually consider how they deliver care. It doesn't all have to be in person. And now I'd say the most exciting thing is I actually think AI, which hopefully we get to talk about, is it's the first time I've ever seen our industry where we're not 10 or 20 years behind. It's the first time we've actually seen healthcare be current with other industries. And there's lots of reasons for that we could talk about. But that's actually really exciting, because now I actually feel like, wow, the industry I invest in is kind of equivalent to other industries in how it's adopting technology.
Tell us about that. Can you give us maybe a startup you've invested in recently that you're really excited about that's optimizing AI in the healthcare space?
Yeah, I can talk about a bunch. Actually, sometimes, like we talked about earlier on, one of the things in venture, it's good to be early in spaces and good to be non-consensus. And about 6 years ago, my partner in Israel, Adam Fisher, and I both started to see these really interesting entrepreneurs who were using, this was pre-ChatGPT and some of the new LLMs, but this was like, using AI, like earlier generations AI, using machine learning, using computer vision, and applying it to healthcare. And so we created a little seed fund within Bessemer. We called it the Deep Health Seed Fund, and set aside it was within our core fund, but we set aside some money to invest in these companies, and we made a bunch of seed investments in companies. So example of one, and a lot of those have done well, by the way. Again, good to be early and good to be non-consensus. Now investing in AI is completely consensus. And even in healthcare, it's consensus.
That's every conversation we have had this week,
Right. So that's a key learning in my career. But anyways, one company I'll talk about that we invested in, actually, it was one of my last meetings I took before the pandemic. So wow, glad. Actually, 2 of my AI companies. My last 2 meetings were 2 AI companies. That I was in. But one of them, and I can tell you about both. One of them's called A Bridge. A Bridge is, people probably have read about it. It's probably one of the, regardless of being healthcare, it's probably one of the top AI companies out there. What A Bridge does very simply is, all of us are familiar with walking in the doctor's office and you want to talk to the doctor about your complaint that you have, or your shoulder hurts, and they're not looking at you because they're sort of back might be turned to you, might be side, they're typing into the electronic medical record that we talked about, and they have to do that because that's the system they have to capture, the clinical note, and then the reason they capture clinical note is not just to make sure that your care, it's documented, but also that's the way they get paid.
Gotcha.
Doctors spend a lot of time doing this in the office, and it doesn't lead to a great patient experience. But even worse, actually they spend a lot of time outside of the office, like nights and weekends.
Yeah.
Thing they call pajama time. They literally call it pajama time because they're actually documenting your visit and making sure they got it right when they're in their pajamas. So it takes
That's
away.
so far from whenever they met the patient, though.
Right. And it's also not great for their lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
So anyways, one way that systems before AI dealt with this is they would actually, a lot of systems would hire clinical scribes, human scribes. So you'd actually have maybe someone in the office or maybe someone in India who was listening in to your conversation so the doctor didn't have to be so meticulous in typing and could pay more attention to you and also didn't have to do it outside of the office. Anyways, what does a bridge do? A bridge takes AI and you just have your cell phone, and a doctor has a recording device, whatever it may be in the office. It's recording the conversation and it automatically generates the note, fills all of the both the sort of numerical drop down menus that they need to fill. Also, is make sure they get the note right in the qualitative form. And by the way, once they're doing the note, it'll show the doctor, oh, this person's complaining of like left shoulder pain. Have you thought about X, Y, or Z? Right? So they can then take the data that it's capturing and provide clinical decision support. It can then automatically link that data, whether it be qualitative or quantitative that they captured, to actual coding, right? Because once you have the data, again, in digital form, once you've transcribed it, there's so many things that you can do about it. So there's not only just capturing the note, but then all the downstream things that you can do, both to improve care as well as ultimately to help the doctor get paid. It's a very compelling piece of technology. And as a result, the company's done really exceptionally well, both commercially and in raising capital.
That's amazing. You mentioned that it takes 10 to 20 years sometimes for healthcare to catch up. And it sounds like a big part of that is the adoption of doctors or medical professionals of just adopting the new tech. So even if this tech does come out, how do you kind of bridge the gap so that doctors, medical professionals are willing to adopt this new tech, even though it might be so much better? But I would think that adoption process is kind of the hardest part.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And for sure, there are more barriers to, I always say in healthcare, it's not just about making the sale. It's then, to your point, about the implementation and getting by, all of the HIPAA regulations and the compliance and the security. That's legitimate. That still exists with AI. The thing that I'd say about AI versus traditional software, it provided utility. But the doctors or whoever the end user had to actually do work to do it, right? Like you had to learn the system. You actually had to, whether it was actually embedded in the EMR mattered a lot, because if it wasn't embedded in the EMR, then you literally had to open a different, web browser, which sounds so minimalistic to people like us who might be at your desk and you might open IE instead of Chrome or whatever. But for a doctor, a doctor is like, they're just running around trying to see patients and triage all day. To have to open up a different web browser 100 times in a day, that's actually a huge barrier, right? Definitely. You probably have to have another single sign-on, right? I mean, there's a whole, it sounds like small stuff, but it's real. But what does AI do? It takes away all that work. Think about what I just talked about with the bridge, right? Before the doctor had to type, maybe they had to hire a scribe. These were things that doctors had to do to use the software. Now a bridge is just get out of the way. Just literally just wear something on you or use your cell phone, have a recording device, and we'll do the rest.
Yeah.
So all of the human training and effort that you talked about, which is real in terms of implementation, and then once you implement, actually getting doctors to engage, that's all the other thing. Healthcare software had very low engagement rates generally.
Interesting.
Now that goes away because it's all automated. That's what the promise of AI is, and that's why I think this time is different than all the other times where we were always a lot slower to adopt.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I think you said the three biggest issues were quality, cost, and experience. But I think cost is probably the biggest pain point for Americans, in the healthcare system. Is AI or can AI help with that problem for people who are seeking medical care?
I think it can. Ultimately on the clinical side, where, by the way, I think the hurdle to adopt AI is higher. We can come to that because there's really several different places where AI can be applied. But actually where I think the cost impact will be felt first is actually all in the back office, the stuff that patients don't see. I'll share an amazing stat to you guys. Do you know how many administrators, think every year the healthcare system will add one doctor. Do you know how many administrators they'll add per one doctor? Take a guess.
3.
I was gonna say 4.
10.
Oh my goodness.
10 administrators
Why
for
do they
every
10
one
people
doctor.
for one doctor?
There's a lot of, charting work and regulation
yeah.
and all this stuff. So every one doctor we had 10 administrators in healthcare.
Wow.
A lot of it's meant for, there's a lot of patient eligibility checking at the front end, calling patients to make sure they're prepared for a procedure, doing a lot of testing about whether they're right. Then you get to the doctor's office. Frankly, the clinical care area is pretty efficient, but then you got to do all this whole revenue cycle process to get paid, which is loads and loads of human being. So that's where I think AI can actually make a huge impact, and we're seeing it, is like literally stripping out some of that that administrative cost. And by the way, like 60% of doctors and nurses say they're going to get out of the profession in the next 5 years, and the number one reason they cite is because of administrative burden. So not only are we hiring a lot of people to actually try and help them, but then to the pajama time point we just made, the doctors are also themselves getting burnt out because of this administrative burden. And so it's like this double whammy. So I think that's where, if you take out half of it, right? I mean, that's a significant load of cost that the patients won't actually see, but it'll be happening in the back office.
Yeah, my girlfriend's a nurse, and she just quit a couple days ago because of how stressful and strenuous like the work is, and pajama time is so real for her and all the other doctors at the IVF clinic. Like they have to go home and just do work until like 11 o'clock at night, wake up, go to work at 7, and then 7 to 11 every day is like their schedule. And so it just seems like that AI needs to be implemented quickly to be able to, and efficiently, to be able to get these people not to work just grueling jobs like all day, every day, because they have lives outside of just.
And I'm sure it also would hurt their kind of ability to be a good nurse or doctor or whatever it is. And like you said, like you're going to retain more healthcare workers who aren't being burnt out so fast by just taking away the
100%. They don't want to do all this administrative stuff. The reason they got into the profession is because they want to care for patients.
Yeah.
And when that ratio gets upside down, they can go do other things, right? They're talented people. So I think that's right. That's the hope.
Is there any way that you're encouraging your portfolio companies to not make a pivot, but just, you're encouraging them to work in a different way now that Trump is going to be president versus Harris being president? Or is it the exact same strategy for all your portfolio companies moving forward?
Listen, I think when you invest in healthcare and when you operate in healthcare, you have to think about regulatory trends and changes, and stroke of the pen risk is real. At the end of the day, though, what I would say, so right now, for instance, you could look at something like Medicaid, which has had a lot of winds behind its back, tailwinds, through policies that the Biden administration put in place as being at risk. Under Biden, Medicaid expanded significantly. Makes sense. Generally, Democrats are for more of a social safety net and for what I would call progressive policies that help people who are underserved. And generally doing that through the federal government rather than the states. Okay, that could be at risk. I don't think Medicaid now serves a whole bunch of people, tens of millions of people in America, and as we talked about, the shifting political sort of demographics are interesting because now Trump has a bigger working class base and the Republicans do too. So you could argue maybe they're not going to touch it, but there could be things that happen to Medicaid. What is now mostly a federally administered program. More power could be pushed into the states. Generally, Republicans view states as laboratories of innovation, right? Each state might have different policies. I think that could happen. I think for sure, Medicaid will be more pushed to commercial, what are called MCOs, managed care organizations, running them rather than the government running it. For sure, maybe they'll innovate more. But I think that actually, while there could be some concern about Medicaid as being a primary place that's attacked, I actually think it's a place where innovation is going to happen too as well, because Republicans tend to want to promote more innovative, let 1,000 flowers bloom type policies rather than the federal government dictating it. So I think, if you're operating Medicaid, you just have to be thoughtful about how you're going to navigate that. I don't think the program is going to go away. I just think it might change, and you have to be kind of thinking and connected with how those changes are going to happen, and thinking about how you're going to, navigate those with your business is what I would say. So that's kind of what I've been advising my companies. Sure. But it's going to take some time to play out. Like these things, it's hard to change these policies, and so I don't want people to overreact either. The final thing I'll say is, what has always been true is if you can prove value, meaning if you can change that ratio that we talked about, right? Either you improve outcomes at the same cost. It's because it's a numerator and a denominator, right? What are the outcomes at what cost? If you can improve outcomes at the same cost, if you can improve outcomes and lower costs, which is the holy grail, right? Mm-hmm. If you can keep outcomes the same and lower costs, like you are creating value versus status quo, right? And value will be rewarded in the healthcare system, even if the ways it's rewarded are different. And I think that's important. So the state of Louisiana now might have more say over how they run their Medicaid program. But the state of Louisiana has the same problem as I talked about at the beginning as every other state. Medicaid is a huge balance sheet, liability for them, and is going to bankrupt their state just like every other state. Mm-hmm. And so one thing the state of Louisiana will continue to pay for is some kind of Medicaid-focused company that either improves outcome and lowers cost, right? So that's the true the North Star that you got to think about, regardless of administration.
Is there a specific part of the healthcare industry that has not been influenced or impacted by AI yet that you're really excited and really banking on and investing in right now that you think, this will be impacted by AI, but it really hasn't been just yet, and this is my bet that I'm making for it?
There are spaces that I'm thinking about that I haven't made a bet in yet. We've made a number of bets, as I've alluded to. I'll talk about two of them.
The third one's a secret. He can't share it because other investors hear it.
I don't do threes. I'm not like your traditional. Everyone speaks in threes. I speak in twos.
Non-consensus.
Speaking 1.5s. No. Yeah. I think two I'd say that are farther off. So these would be more early seed stage investing because I don't think there's a ton at scale. I really think AI is going to be an amazing clinical decisions support tool for doctors. Those companies exist out there. But ultimately, I think at the end of the day, call it 10 to 20 years from now, I think AI will not truly replace the doctor, but might be the frontline doctor. So let's just take, something that's happening today. There is no doubt today, if you have an image done through a CAT scan or an MRI, or if you have like a biopsy taken and have pathology slide that is made, historically, human eyes have read that image, right? Whether it be the DICOM image that comes out of one of these imaging machines for radiology, or whether it becomes the actual slide. Like we still have humans looking through telescopes into little slides, which is kind of crazy. The data shows that computer vision and AI-assisted computer vision outperforms the top specialist in radiology or pathology at any of the academic medical schools in Boston, in New York, anywhere, right? And yet the reimbursement system today mandates that doctors have to be the first read because of, doctors are, in some ways they have lots of power, right? And their representative bodies can dictate how legislation and reimbursement happen. But that seems crazy to me.
I'd also imagine that it's a weird thing because it doesn't actually make any logical sense. But I would think I want a human to look at my results, not an AI robot.
I think it's actually inverse. I think you want the AI to do the first read.
Definitely.
And then if there's a gray area, by the way, talking about both, because we know the data will show, if you look at any academic paper in this, that the quality is either the same or better.
Right, yeah.
But I understand
logically, the AI, it does it better.
It does.
But our human brains, I feel like we think a human, I can rely on that more. If you get a cancer diagnosis, you're going to probably prefer...
I totally disagree with you.
You think
if
so?
I have a cancer diagnosis, I want the computer.
Okay.
For sure.
I think you might be in a rare group then. I think most Americans would be like, I need a second opinion. I need a doctor to look at this.
That's okay. That's okay. But as a first read, I absolutely want a computer reading it.
Really?
Because it's not going to miss anything. I don't know about your eyes. My eyes aren't great.
Sure. I think that you're thinking logically.
Right. No, I know.
But I'm not sure most.
But I'm just telling you, that's what you want. But the problem is, I've always, even with the election, this is not what you want. But so it's not. You're right. You got to listen to the customer. But I do think ultimately it should be computer first, and then if there is a gray area, or if you want a second opinion, than a human. But we're not there yet, to your point. And we're not even close to being there, which is why I said 10 to 20 years. But I think that's a really interesting area. And you talk about that equation, which you come back to. Healthcare is broken, your question. How do we solve it? Like, think about if you just, like, reduce the amount of, I mean, specialists are the most expensive, you know, these highly trained, highly skilled, highly educated talent. And I'm not trying, just because computers are better than that doesn't demean their skill. But they're very expensive. If we can utilize them better, right? I think that's a huge piece of driving down the cost. Ultimately, we're not there yet. We're
What does
just
that
focused
mean?
on the back office
Utilize
side.
them better.
You need fewer of them.
What are the?
If they're not reading 100 scans a day,
Yeah.
right, or 1,000 scans a day, or 1,000 slides, but instead they're to your point. If you want a human, they're actually doing the second read, or they're doing it. By the way, sometimes the computer won't be able to make a call. There'll be a gray area. It might not be yes or no.
Yeah.
But a lot of these slides are pretty clearly yes or no. You can automate all that ultimately, and you might need fewer humans. I mean, there's a lot of implications for that, but by the way, there's a lot of implications for AI across our world.
Yeah.
But in healthcare, I think the clinical side is super interesting. And by the way, that's already happening today. It's just our system isn't set out. But then think about all the other various diseases that could be called by computers and by AI and what have you. So that's one area. The second area I think that's really interesting is generally humans are horrible because it's very complicated about making healthcare decisions. What insurance plan should I buy? Well, what kind of pre-existing conditions do you have? You know, what kind of risk are you? And I think sort of like more than just a Dr. Google. Because Google, like a lot of people, by the way, use Google for healthcare search. Like, it's amazing. It's probably the third or fourth most searched term in Google, or search area in Google is healthcare. And honestly, the Google experience is not great. But like an AI-enabled health concierge that's able to direct you through your life and your health journey, and who's ingesting a lot of these medical records that we talked about, and really making it personalized when it comes down to, you know, almost being like, to your point, okay, should I have a doctor read my slide or not? Like this could be your sort of companion. I think there's something there. I don't know exactly what it looks like. I don't know exactly what the business model will be, but there's so much, and there'll be so much. By the way, genomic data is going to be coming out, and people are going to be, it's coming down the cost curve. People are going to be getting more genomic testing. Healthcare data is a third of the world's data. How can any one of us? I mean, I'm pretty smart in the area, but like, how do you sort through that? I think there's a model to be had there. I don't know what it looks like yet, but I'd love to see companies that are thinking about that.
We're constantly hearing about how AI is going to take a bunch of people's jobs. I don't know if that's got much merit to it, but you look at like the actors guild or whatever it was, and the whole kind of strike they had against AI. Do you think something like that might happen in the near future with doctors striking against AI?
I think companies have to be very thoughtful about how they approach the market right now. Because I think they're, you know, and by the way, I don't think the technology is there right now to replace doctors. So I don't think it's a real threat. Eventually,
10, 20 years.
With how fast AI is moving, probably less than 10, 20 years.
Yeah, I don't actually know. It is a real concern if I, you know. Yeah, it's a real concern. Doctors are very strong, political. They're often very high. You know, if you look at any congressperson, there are a lot of doctors who donate to them. Health system's the biggest employer, generally in every single metropolitan area. So there's a lot of political power there. But yeah, I think it's a concern.
When you've talked to doctors about this, have you felt like they're kind of pushing back on it, or do they seem to be?
Well, let me say, I do think there's I'm not sure AI fully replaces all of healthcare doctors, right? There's still a, you know, if you've got a stroke, right, you need someone to open up the artery vessel, wherever the juncture, and you need someone to solve that. You know, like one of my friends is a world-leading neurosurgeon. He does amazing things. Like, he's opening up brains every day. Like, that can't be done by AI. So there is still absolutely a place for
robotics. The robotics world. You know, we're in Cambridge. That's like
maybe
all being developed
maybe I'm
right
too
now.
narrow in my thinking. Yeah, you're like, yeah, you might be right, man. I don't know. Okay,
cheaper probably.
Yeah. Well, and the Intuitive Surgical, like, first of all, I don't know if you followed that company, but these are the robot. This is a company that does the robotic arms, which are, you know, now sort of navigated by doctors. What doctors used to do laparoscopically with hands, they now that company is like one of the best performing stocks in America over like the last 5 years.
Okay.
So
it might make sense they would.
The robotics is real, to your point. So maybe yet.
Yeah.
But I still think there's going to be for a while a place for like hands-on doctors, tertiary care, really, tragic episodes. But yeah, it's a question. I think companies have to navigate it right now. To my point, I don't think I don't think we're at that existential moment right now. So, a lot of these companies are offering co-pilots, right? It's not like fully, although some of my companies are like have fully agentic capabilities, right? But a lot of them are more co-pilots. But human scribes, like we talked about human scribes with the bridge, like how long, what's going on? There were companies built that were, outsourced scribing companies. Like that's going away.
It sounds like startups need to start in the near future, or maybe even right now, start thinking about how they can partner with doctors and introduce this tech in a way that's going to be a friendly relationship rather than potentially cause tension that could lead to a strike of some kind or a pushback.
Or even in the near, a strike is more of a systemic thing, which could be real, but at the individual company level, yes, they have to be very thoughtful about how they introduce a project.
Yeah.
We have another company called Smarter DX, which is doing great. I talked about all this revenue cycle management process, the process by which doctors ultimately get and health systems ultimately get paid for the care that they deliver. One of the things that has to happen is it's called clinical documentation integrity, which is a very nice euphemism. Essentially what it's doing is making sure that all the care that the doctor provided is properly code forward and captured, right? So if you miss a code, that's actually dollars and cents that you might have missed for your pocketbook.
Sure.
That was all done by humans who would like read the record that the doctor put in the EMR and look through the medical chart and say, oh, did they capture the right code? They might have missed a code. And they literally comb through charts. That can all be automated by technology, right? Which can ingest a lot more data, process a lot more data, and ultimately lead, presumably, to more accurate coding, which helps the health system.
Yep.
What Smarter DX does is exactly that. Now, they haven't replaced what are called CDI specialists, clinical documentation integrity specialists, which there are hundreds in hospitals, thousands of hospitals across America. They haven't replaced those. They've gone to market as a co-pilot, which is like, let us help you process more data, process more charts. Because oftentimes what CDI specialists do would pick the high acuity charts because that leads to higher reimbursement.
Sure.
And now Smarter DX can say, you can process every chart. And we're gonna raise to you the issues that we see flagged that then you have to go back to the doctor and say, oh, by the way, did you actually provide that care? And if so, we should properly code for it. So they went to market saying, we're just gonna help you do better, scan more, and by the way, get paid more and look more like a hero to the ultimate CFO of your hospital. So that's one way that you go to market, is make the end user. But ultimately, could all of that be truly automated? Maybe, yeah, probably, in the future.
Steve, we're coming close to the end of our time. When you look towards 2025, what's a goal you have for yourself and also Bessemer that if you accomplish, you'll be really proud of the firm and yourself?
I think there's lots of great things about working at Bessemer, but I think one of the things which really I hope our entrepreneurs feel, and I know I feel in like these times when it's not always go, 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 and the market's not always like, on a massive tear and a bull run, is like it's been, other than if you're an AI company, which we talked about, a lot of companies, it's been a hard bunch of years. Like budgets, buyers' budgets are down, the financing market is tight, nobody's going public. There's not a lot of, it's been hard. It's been a struggle. And I think what I appreciate about Bessemer is like, because we've been around for 100 plus years and we've seen many, many cycles, and we have a bunch of investors who have a lot of patience in us because we've done well by them, and we sort of make it clear that we're going to be patient with our companies. That's the way you build really great companies. I feel like I'm proud about that and how we've handled this time, and that we continue to back our companies and like support them through this process, and we're a steady hand as an advisor and a capital partner. So that's something that I'm proud about, and I hope we continue to support our companies, because when things are tough, you often see what some firms really like, and I think that's how we've differentiated ourselves. Now that being said, I'm also really hopeful that 2025 is the year where we start to feel like the market's coming back.
Yeah.
Right? People are talking about IPOs because like that just, our economy needs not the investors. I mean, we help a little bit, but it's really, we need entrepreneurs. Like we talked about what makes America so great. It's like the innovative spirit of our country in healthcare and in other industries is like the top. It's why we continue to have GLP-1s and, cancer drugs that now literally cure people rather than just like give them a few months or a few years, like literally cure people. Like that's just astonishing in my industry alone. And so we need these entrepreneurs like innovating, we need to continue to support them. And, honestly, like one way to do that is to have them have success, right? Financially. And so the IPO market opening up, which I expect to happen in 2025, I look forward to that. Like I look forward to good times, again, because not just for us financially, for the entrepreneurs who've really slugged it out for a couple of years. Like I've had some entrepreneurs who, have really grinded, and they're, like this past year has been a really good year to see them start to get see the tailwinds because they deserve that. And then ultimately to have the IPO markets open up, both for those entrepreneurs in our portfolio, but also for the broader economy. I think it's really important.
Anything on the personal side that you would love to accomplish in 2025? You mentioned your son, and I don't know if there's anything on the personal side that you'd say is a goal for you.
I love my boys. They're awesome. I have 2 sons. I think I've, just trying to maximize the amount of time with them. Like I just creating the space to coach them in basketball and go to Celtics games with them and coach them in baseball. Now that I'm a little older, I've realized that like that's the most important thing, and that with my wife, Sarah, who's amazing. Like we've just got I feel very fortunate. We've got a great family. So, giving myself permission to do that, go at 5 o'clock to go coach them at night, but knowing that this morning I woke up at 5 a.m. to edit a podcast that I did that I want to get out on the election, right? So like giving myself the space and now having the flexibility to do that. First of all, it's a real gift that I have in my career. I don't take it for granted, but making sure that I do that is like, that's what provides me the most joy. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Very lucky.
Steve, we really appreciate your time today, man. Thank you for allowing us to come into the office and film.
Yeah, it's great to be with you guys. It's a lot of fun podcast. I love it. Or video cast. What are we calling this? A
Podcast, yeah.
podcast.
It'll be video and audio.
Vlogcast.
Vlogcast. Yeah, exactly.
We're gonna crush Rogan. Let's do it.
That's the goal.
That's right.
Yeah.
Number
you.
1 in Austin.
Yeah, you too. Yeah, exactly.